What I'm about to tell you will shock you about how billion-dollar deals can crumble in mere hours. I was the senior financial analyst sitting in that glass conference room on the 47th floor of Manhattan, watching what should have been the biggest success of my career turn into an absolute nightmare. The merger between TechFlow Industries and Data Vault Corporation, a $1.5 billion deal that had taken 18 months to negotiate, was about to fall apart overnight, and I had a front row seat to witness every devastating moment. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. This story will change how you see corporate America forever. My name is Sarah Chen, and I've been working in mergers and acquisitions for 12 years. I've seen deals worth hundreds of millions come and go, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened during those fateful 72 hours in March 2024. It all started on a Tuesday morning when I received an urgent call from my boss, Michael Harrison, the head of M&A at Goldman Sachs. His voice was tense, almost panicked, something I'd never heard before from a man who had orchestrated some of Wall Street's biggest deals. "Sarah, we have a problem. The TechFlow Data Vault merger is in serious trouble. I need you in conference room A in 10 minutes with all the files." My heart sank. This wasn't just any deal. This was the deal that was supposed to define both companies' futures and secure my promotion to vice president. As I rushed through the hallways clutching the thick manila folders containing months of due diligence reports, financial projections, and legal documentation, I couldn't help but think about how we got here. TechFlow Industries, a cloud computing giant led by 34-year-old CEO Marcus Reed, was acquiring Data Vault Corporation, a data storage company run by 29-year-old Jennifer Walsh. Both were Silicon Valley darlings, featured on magazine covers, hailed as the next generation of tech visionaries. The merger was supposed to create a powerhouse worth over $8 billion, combining TechFlow's innovative software with Data Vault's massive storage infrastructure. But what I discovered in that conference room would reveal that these visionaries were complete novices playing with money they didn't understand. When I walked in, the atmosphere was suffocating. Harrison was pacing back and forth, his usually perfect silver hair disheveled, his tie loosened. A sight that immediately told me this wasn't just a minor hiccup. Around the mahogany table sat our entire team: Rebecca Torres, our legal counsel, David Kim, the senior accountant, and James Mitchell, our risk assessment specialist. Their faces were pale, and the documents scattered across the table looked like the aftermath of a hurricane. "Sarah, sit down," Harrison said without looking at me. "We've just received some information that changes everything. It appears that neither Marcus Reed nor Jennifer Walsh fully understood what they were signing up for when they initiated this merger." He slid a thick report across the table toward me. "This is Data Vault's actual financial position, not the sanitized version we were initially provided. Take a look at page 47. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped through the pages, and when I reached page 47, my blood ran cold. Data Vault Corporation, the company that was supposed to bring $2.1 billion in assets to the merger, was actually carrying $1.8 billion in hidden debt that had been cleverly disguised through a complex web of subsidiary companies and offshore accounts. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was what I found on page 52. Evidence that Jennifer Walsh, the supposed tech prodigy, had been using investor money to fund her personal lifestyle, including a $12 million mansion in Malibu, a private jet, and a collection of luxury cars worth over $3 million. But the real disaster was just beginning, and what happened next, no one saw coming. The revelation about Data Vault's hidden debt was just the tip of the iceberg. As I continued reading through the damning report, Harrison's phone rang with an urgency that made everyone in the room freeze. It was Marcus Reed calling directly, something that never happened. CEOs of billion-dollar companies don't call mid-level investment bankers directly unless something catastrophic is unfolding. Harrison put the call on speaker, and what we heard next made my stomach drop to the floor. "Michael, we have a serious problem." Marcus's voice crackled through the speakerphone, and I could hear the panic he was trying to suppress. "Jennifer Walsh just called me in hysterics. Apparently, the SEC has launched a surprise investigation into Data Vault's accounting practices. They raided her offices this morning with a full forensic accounting team." The room went dead silent. SEC investigations don't just happen randomly. They're triggered by whistleblowers, suspicious activity reports, or in this case, someone with inside knowledge who decided to come forward. Harrison's face turned ashen. "Marcus, how long have you known about Data Vault's real financial situation?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. There was a long pause before Marcus answered. And when he did, his voice was barely above a whisper. I trusted the due diligence reports. I trusted Jennifer. I never thought to dig deeper. That's when I realized we weren't just dealing with hidden debt. We were dealing with two inexperienced CEOs who had been playing with investor money like it was Monopoly cash. But the nightmare was just getting started. Rebecca Torres, our legal counsel, had been frantically typing on her laptop during the call, and suddenly she looked up with terror in her eyes. Michael, I'm seeing breaking news alerts. The Wall Street Journal is about to publish an expose titled "The Billion-Dollar Fraud: How Two Young CEOs Deceived Wall Street." This is going live in 30 minutes. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. 18 months of work, hundreds of hours of analysis, millions in advisory fees. Everything was about to crumble in real time. Harrison ended the call with Marcus and immediately dialed Jennifer Walsh. When she answered, her voice was shaking so violently she could barely speak. Michael, I don't know what to do. The SEC agents are still here. They've seized all our computers, and my CFO just resigned via email. He's not even returning my calls. I watched Harrison's hands tremble as he gripped the phone. In my 12 years in finance, I had never seen a partner at Goldman Sachs lose composure like this. What Jennifer told us next would expose just how unprepared these young executives really were. I never understood all those financial documents my team are prepared, she admitted through tears. I trusted my CFO completely. When he showed me reports saying we had $2.1 billion in assets, I believed him. When he said the debt was manageable, I signed whatever he put in front of me. I thought being a CEO meant having vision and inspiration. I didn't realize I needed to understand every line item in our financial statements. The confession was devastating. Here was a 29-year-old woman who had been hailed as a tech genius, featured on the cover of Fortune magazine, given keynote speeches about leadership and innovation. And she had just admitted she didn't understand her own company's finances. But Marcus Reed's situation was even worse. When Harrison called him back to discuss emergency protocols, Marcus broke down completely. Michael, I have to be honest with you, Marcus said, his voice cracking. I've been so focused on product development and market expansion that I delegated all financial oversight to my board of directors. I trusted them to handle the money side while I handled the tech side. When they told me this merger would be profitable, I believed them. When they said Data Vault was a perfect match, I didn't question it. I realize now that I should have been more involved, but I thought that's what boards were for. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come, and it would change everything we thought we knew about this deal. David Kim, our senior accountant, had been quietly working on his laptop throughout these devastating phone calls, cross-referencing Data Vault's hidden financial documents with TechFlow's publicly available information. Suddenly, he looked up with an expression I'll never forget, a mixture of horror and disbelief that made my blood run cold. Michael, we need to look at TechFlow's numbers too. Something doesn't add up with their cash flow statements from the last 6 quarters. Harrison ordered David to project his findings onto the conference room's large screen, and what we saw there shattered any remaining hope we had of salvaging this deal. TechFlow Industries, the company that was supposed to be the stable, profitable acquirer in this merger, had been inflating their revenue numbers by booking future contracts as current income. They had counted 3-year software licensing deals as if the full payment had been received up front, creating an artificial picture of explosive growth that simply didn't exist. Look at this. David pointed to a series of red highlighted numbers on the screen. TechFlow reported $847 million in revenue for Q4 2023, but their actual cash received was only $312 million. The rest is projected income from contracts that haven't even been signed yet. They're counting on deals that might never materialize. The implications were staggering. TechFlow wasn't just acquiring a company with hidden debt. They were doing it with money they didn't actually have. But here's where the story gets even more unbelievable. I decided to dig into Marcus Reed's background, something I probably should have done months earlier. What I discovered was that before founding TechFlow, Marcus had exactly 3 years of experience in the tech industry. 3 years. He had worked as a junior software developer at a small startup, then jumped straight to founding his own company at age 31. He had no experience managing large-scale finances, no experience with mergers and acquisitions, no experience leading a company with thousands of employees. Jennifer Walsh's background was even more concerning. She had founded Data Vault at age 26, fresh out of an MBA program, with absolutely zero experience in data storage technology. Her company's initial success had come from acquiring smaller data companies and rebranding their services under the Data Vault name. She wasn't an innovator or a tech visionary. She was essentially a very young, very inexperienced acquirer who had gotten lucky during the tech boom of 2021-2022. The most devastating realization was that Wall Street, including my own firm, had been complicit in creating this disaster. We had all been so caught up in the narrative of young, disruptive tech leaders that we had failed to do proper due diligence on their actual qualifications. Marcus and Jennifer looked the part: young, confident, well-spoken, photogenic. They gave great presentations and told compelling stories about the future of technology, but neither of them had the experience or knowledge to manage billion-dollar companies, let alone engineer complex mergers. As these realizations sank in, my phone started buzzing with text messages from colleagues at other investment banks. The news was spreading through Wall Street like wildfire. "Sarah, is it true about the TechFlow deal? I'm hearing Goldman might lose $50 million in advisory fees. Are you guys really going to have to pay back the retainer?" The professional humiliation was almost as painful as the financial disaster we were facing. Harrison called an emergency meeting with the senior partners. Within an hour, our conference room was filled with some of the most powerful people on Wall Street, men and women who had orchestrated deals worth hundreds of billions of dollars, who had never experienced a failure of this magnitude. The silence in that room was deafening as Harrison explained the situation, step by step. But what happened next would prove that inexperience wasn't just limited to the CEOs, it extended to their entire leadership teams. The emergency partner meeting revealed something even more terrifying than incompetent CEOs. It exposed systematic failures throughout both organizations that went far deeper than we had imagined. Senior partner Elizabeth Crawford, a woman who had been orchestrating major deals since before I was born, listened to our presentation with growing horror. When Harrison finished explaining the situation, she asked the question that cut straight to the heart of the matter. How did two companies with combined revenues of over $3 billion manage to hide their true financial positions from our due diligence team? The answer was as shocking as it was embarrassing. Rebecca Torres had spent the afternoon investigating the due diligence process, and what she discovered was a cascade of failures that reached every level of both organizations. Elizabeth, it appears that neither TechFlow nor DataVault actually had competent CFOs during the negotiation period, Rebecca reported, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. Marcus Reed's CFO was a 28-year-old MBA graduate with 2 years of experience at a mid-sized accounting firm. Jennifer Walsh's CFO was actually her college roommate who had gotten a finance degree but had never worked for a company larger than 50 employees. The room erupted in stunned silence. We were looking at a situation where billion-dollar companies were being run by people who were essentially playing dress-up as executives. But the incompetence didn't stop there. As Rebecca continued her investigation, she uncovered that TechFlow's board of directors consisted primarily of Marcus's personal friends and early investors who had gotten rich during the company's rapid growth but had no experience governing a large corporation. "Look at this," Rebecca continued, projecting TechFlow's board composition onto the screen. "The chairman is Marcus's former college roommate who runs a small marketing agency. The lead independent director is a venture capitalist who has never been involved in a merger larger than $100 million. None of them understood the complexities of what they were approving when they voted to proceed with this acquisition. DataVault's governance structure was even worse. Jennifer Walsh had maintained absolute control over all major decisions, with a board that existed primarily on paper. Her directors rarely attended meetings, approved proposals via email without detailed review, and trusted Jennifer's judgment completely, despite her obvious lack of experience with complex financial transactions. But the real nightmare was just beginning, and what I discovered next would show how deep this incompetence really ran. I had been tasked with reviewing the merger agreement itself, the legal document that was supposed to govern this $1.5 billion transaction. What I found there made me physically ill. The contract was riddled with fundamental errors, unclear clauses, and loopholes that could have been exploited by either side to escape their obligations. The most egregious example was Section 12.4, which dealt with the treatment of DataVault's debt obligations. The language was so ambiguous that it could be interpreted to mean that TechFlow would assume responsibility for debt that hadn't even been disclosed yet, or alternatively, that DataVault could retain certain debts while still receiving the full purchase price. Any competent legal team should have caught this immediately, but both sides had signed without proper legal review. Even worse, the merger agreement contained no meaningful penalties for misrepresentation. If either company had lied about their financial position, which, as we now knew, both had done extensively, the maximum penalty was a $10 million fee. $10 million on a $1.5 billion deal. It was like putting a $10 fine on bank robbery. The most inexperienced decision-makers were now trying to navigate a crisis that required decades of expertise to resolve. When the Wall Street Journal article went live at 4:47 p.m. that Tuesday, the stock market reaction was immediate and brutal. TechFlow's stock price dropped 67% in after-hours trading. DataVault, which had been trading as a private company with an estimated valuation of $2.1 billion, was now being valued by analysts at less than $200 million. Overnight, more than $6 billion in shareholder value had evaporated. But the human cost was even more devastating. Both companies employed over 8,000 people combined. As news of the failed merger spread, panic set in among employees who had been counting on stock options and merger bonuses to secure their financial futures. I received dozens of calls from friends who worked at both companies, all asking the same desperate question. Sarah, are we going to lose our jobs? And the worst part was that Marcus and Jennifer were completely unprepared to handle the crisis they had created. Part 5. The final chapter of this disaster unfolded over the next 48 hours, and watching two inexperienced CEOs try to manage a crisis of this magnitude was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Marcus Reed called an emergency all-hands meeting with TechFlow's employees, and the video of his speech went viral for all the wrong reasons. Standing in front of 4,000 worried employees, he broke down in tears and admitted, "I don't know what to do. I've never dealt with anything like this before. I'm sorry I let everyone down." While his honesty was admirable, it was also the final nail in the coffin of investor confidence. CEOs of billion-dollar companies aren't supposed to admit they're in over their heads during public crises. The video clip was shared thousands of times on social media, with financial commentators calling it the most devastating CEO meltdown in corporate history. Jennifer Walsh's response was even worse. Instead of taking responsibility, she held a press conference where she blamed everyone except herself, the SEC for conducting a witch hunt, her former CFO for betraying her trust, and even the media for sensationalizing the situation. Her defensive, combative tone alienated the few remaining supporters she had among investors and employees. But what happened next would expose the ultimate cost of putting inexperienced leaders in charge of billions of dollars. The SEC investigation revealed that the financial mismanagement at both companies was even worse than we had initially discovered. DataVault had been operating essentially as a Ponzi scheme for the past 18 months, using new investor money to pay operating expenses while hiding the fact that their core business was losing money every quarter. TechFlow's situation was equally dire. Their aggressive revenue recognition practices had masked the fact that customer satisfaction was plummeting, contract renewals were declining, and their main product was becoming obsolete as competitors introduced superior technology. Marcus had been so focused on growth metrics and impressive presentations that he had ignored fundamental business operations. Within a week of the merger collapse, both companies filed for bankruptcy protection. 8,000 employees lost their jobs. Pension funds that had invested heavily in both companies lost hundreds of millions of dollars. Money that belonged to teachers, firefighters, and retirees who had trusted these visionary leaders with their life savings. The personal cost to Marcus and Jennifer was severe but insignificant compared to the damage they had caused to others. Marcus lost his $15 million mansion and was forced to declare personal bankruptcy when investors sued him for fraud. Jennifer faced criminal charges for misuse of investor funds and was ultimately sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. But the real tragedy was how preventable all of this had been. If either company had hired experienced executives, if their boards had included people with relevant expertise, if the investment banks had conducted proper due diligence instead of being blinded by the excitement of working with disruptive young leaders, thousands of people would still have their jobs and retirement savings today. As I sat in that conference room on the final day, watching the news coverage of the bankruptcy filings, I realized that this disaster was a perfect example of what happens when inexperience meets complexity at scale. Marcus and Jennifer weren't evil people. They were simply young, ambitious individuals who had been promoted far beyond their capabilities by a system that valued youth and charisma over competence and experience. If you made it this far, you're special. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, activate notifications, and share with 3 people who need to understand how corporate inexperience can destroy billions in value. The TechFlow Data Vault merger collapse became a case study taught in business schools around the world. A cautionary tale about the dangers of putting novices at the wheel of billion-dollar decisions. And the most important lesson? Sometimes experience isn't just valuable, it's essential, especially when other people's livelihoods and life savings are on the line.